And we're live. What's up, friends from around the world? Welcome to the second ever Great Debate Roundtable. Not 2, not 5, but 10 Israelis and Palestinians coming together for a vibrant discussion. Today we're going to touch on many different topics, from narratives, reconciliation, moving forward, and better understanding our respective cultures, how they differ and how they are alike. It's going to be an exciting session. Let's see what happens. We're going to start like we normally do. We'll do a brief little round of introductions, and then we'll get straight into the topics themselves. So without further ado, our 10 guests, we could just take it from the right. So Jason, all you.
All right. Hi, guys. My name is Jason. This is my 4th time appearing on the Great Debate channel. I'm an Australian-American Palestinian of Palestinian heritage, living in Perth. And I'm passionate about creating dialogue that brings us closer to understanding each other.
Hi, my name's Danny. Raised in LA, live currently in Israel. BA and MA in Middle Eastern political science, and passionate about starting dialogue between two sides.
Hey, my name is Omar. I'm a Palestinian, and originally my family is from the village of El Khobeba, originally in Hebron. And as you can tell from my accent, I'm an American from the East Coast, and I'm currently a PhD student.
That's me now. Okay, so my name is Amiel Ben Shimon. I live in Jerusalem. I'm Israeli, from France. I moved when I was 11, and I like also to have a dialogue and to actually solve the conflict. Try by my way.
Hi, I'm Rafi. I live in Jerusalem. I work in biotechnology, and I like to promote dialogue and interesting ideas to help with the Palestinian-Israeli conflict.
Hi, I'm going by Ammar. Myself and Karma will be anonymous for the first.
Hi, I'm Karma. Okay. Hi,
chance,
I'm
but I'm
Daniel.
a Palestinian from the West Bank.
Do I go?
Wait, hold on. We seem to have Daniel and Ammar speaking at the same time. I think it just broke up a little bit. So Daniel, real quick. Ammar's still intro.
Okay, sorry.
Did I drop out? Or?
Maybe Karma goes?
Hi, my name is Karma. I'm Palestinian from Ashkelon originally. I lived most of my life in Gaza, and right now I'm studying abroad, and that's pretty much it. I hope we can have a fruitful discussion and debate today.
Fantastic.
Can you guys hear me?
Oh, yeah.
Loud and clear.
Loud and clear.
Yeah.
Hi, my name's Daniel. Born in Israel. Though I lived most of my life in Canada, so I'm a college student. And yeah, I'm passionate about the Middle East in general, and especially Jews, and giving our perspective to other people around the world and learning other people's perspective.
Hi, my name is Izzy. I was born and raised in Jordan. I'm a Palestinian refugee by birth. Both of my parents are Palestinian. I have a master's degree in environment management and policy, and I've always believed that dialogue is the way forward. And
I don't think we can hear you, Izzy.
I hear Izzy.
Did you all hear me?
Yeah, I heard you. Yeah. Izzy, were you finished or?
Yes.
Awesome, great. So look, as we can see that when you have 10 on the screen, it doesn't look as cool as when there's 9 on the screen. So I'm going to be hopping in and out. I am the moderator after all, so seeing me is not that important. So I'm going to lay low and just chime in when it's relevant. Just a few quick reminders, if you're just finding out about this channel for the first time, we do awesome live discussions every week. It's now coming to the point where it's more than once a week. So please like and subscribe if you like what you see. We also have a Patreon where you can support us for as little as $1 a month. This really helps us continue to grow and build our operation. Any amount is appreciated. We have a Discord where we have daily conversations, both in text and in voice. If you don't know what Discord is, well, you're going to have to join our Discord and find out. Can one of our community members just drop that in the chat? Because I know y'all are here, so put that in the comments so people can join. After this discussion, we're going to move it over to the Discord to continue the discussion in voice for a little after party, so just keep that in mind. Before we get into the first topic, Amar, you mentioned briefly about you and Karma being anonymous. You broke up, so I'm not sure if you explained why, but can one of you just briefly explain the anonymity and the importance behind it?
Sure.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, for people who live in Palestine, in terms of like freedom of speech and whatnot, it's not quite the same. It sort of varies depending on where you're from. But another part of it is even if you have some birth to speak freely, you can't really speak your mind, and you really can't get more. So I think it's a lot easier for people to speak anonymously in order to articulate how they really feel, not feeling any pressure to not criticize certain figures. And everyone's situation is different depending on their family, others around them, not just themselves and their own security. So that's mostly what it is. Karma.
Thank you, Amar. Karma, I don't know if you heard that, but Karma, are you trying to speak right now?
Yeah, I think you
Yes.
tried.
Can you guys hear me?
Yeah. If you
Yeah,
want, feel free to build on what Amar said regarding anonymity.
Yeah, I'm totally with Amar on this, but like in Palestine specifically, there's some contention in being like publicly spoken. In my case, I can't really do it, like for security reasons and many reasons as well. So like, I think it's better this way in our case, and I hope you guys like have no problem with it, the anonymity part. That's
Yeah, our approach is, obviously we want people to show their faces, but we're very understanding of the reality of the situation, and we do understand that it's not viable for everybody to be able to come and show
Yeah.
their face or even have their real name. So for us, more important than someone showing their face, it's that they're actually willing to engage in these important topics. So that's most important, and we don't want somebody's need for anonymity to be a reason why they can't engage in dialogue. So we're completely cool doing it this way. It's great to have you here. It seems like Amar dropped out, but he should be back. We'll start. We'll get started. We'll start with something fun. We are going to talk about, we're speaking about a conflict that arouses immense emotion. So I figure there's some benefit to starting with some fun stuff. So let's talk a little bit about culture. Israeli culture, Palestinian culture. How are they different? How are they alike? How are they shared? This will lead us into the conversation on reconciliation and a path forward. It's at least in my belief that if we could begin to A, respect each other's culture, but B, build a shared culture, well, that would be an obvious step in the right direction. But I will leave it to you. So whoever wants, the floor is yours. Culture. I can call on individuals, but I figured people would just be hopping right in. Rafi, I know you have a lot to say about the cultures as a scholar, the scholarly type that you are?
Thank you. Sure. I mean, Israeli culture is not really like a monolith. It's very diverse. Like where I live in Jerusalem, it's quite different than people in Tel Aviv and in other parts. And Jerusalem culture is we're very mixed between like Jews and Palestinians. Where I live, there's like 350,000 Palestinians and maybe 600 something thousand Jews. So I go to the grocery store and like half the people I see are Palestinian, and we're very like comfortable with that. It feels almost like when you're in Jerusalem, you're not really in a conflict the same way. Even though I know there's not real equality here, it's not nearly it's not literally like as intense as places like the West Bank or as other people feel, and also different than maybe people in Tel Aviv who sort of feel somewhat apart from the conflict because they're like 25 kilometers away and there's a big wall in between them and the Palestinians, and they're like in a 95% Jewish area. So Jerusalem culture is also very conservative and somewhat religious in a way. Like most of the people here are religious, but kind of laid back. And yeah, like a lot of the Jews here are like very traditional. Like I came here, I guess, because my parents actually moved here, and they were like religious Zionists and sort of a spiritual, renaissance for Jewish people to come back to the central hills of Judea, Samaria, Jerusalem, and sort of feel the spirituality, the presence of God in your daily life, and to be in a place where like every restaurant is kosher and all the food is like, as opposed to living where I grew up in America, where everything was quite, with like being Jewish was a very like niche thing, and there was like a handful of places you could eat, and so it's like being normal almost as being Jewish in here, and at the same time, you have quite a lot of exposure to Palestinians and to a lot of other cultures because there's a lot of tourists here and normally when there's not Corona, and so there's a wide range of cultures. I don't want to take too much time, but I can, there's like Mizrahi culture, which is like more traditional. They're like religious in their belief and their ideology, but in their practice a little more liberal. You have ultra Orthodox, or they don't like to be called ultra Orthodox Haredim, or like very very specific on following all the rules very very meticulously, and they don't particularly define themselves as Zionists because they have all sorts of gripes with Zionism. Not necessarily that means they're like supporting the Palestinians, but they have their own sort of issues with the secularism of Zionism. And then you have like the secular Israelis, like sort of the Ashkenazi secular Israelis, with a totally, they're the most like sort of traditional original Zionist in a way, and they're almost European and very modern in their culture. And then over time it sort of becomes kind of a soup. Like my wife is Iraqi and I'm Ashkenazi, and so my kids, like, who knows what they are anymore. They have like one set of grandparents who are Iraqi, one set of parents who are like Ashkenazi American, and I don't know if they've even thought about how they define
When you're
themselves.
my age, you don't even think about like what you are, because you're mixed with so many things. So it's almost like it doesn't even, you're just Jewish. You just think about, I'm not going to be like, oh, I'm like 3/8 Ashkenazi, 4/8 Sephardi. Like you don't think of it like that. It's really mixed, I'd say, especially in the Tel Aviv, Gush Dan area. Yeah.
Most people are mixed today. My husband and I talk about it a lot because I personally always ask people where their background is from because it gives me a better understanding. I still, coming from America and then coming to Israel, I see the difference between Mizrahi and Ashkenazi. My mother's Ashkenazia, but like she's from Argentina, so it's a bit different. And my father is Iraqi. So there's a whole different culture. But I do think that there's this kind of like ultra culture, ultra identity of Israeli. Like you can see whether Mizrahi or Ashkenazi if they come from Israel, like Blundstones or Sandalit Shoresh, and just the way they speak, it's kind of like Daniel said, kind of see it less.
Yeah, it's like in the process of becoming like a melting pot, but like a melting pot where we're watching it happen. We're like at the earlier stages of this melting pot, like making Israelis more sort of. Yeah.
And now with
Well, there's a
Ethiopians,
similarity to be
they're
drawn between the melting pot within Jewish society and the multi-ethnic, multi-religious society that Palestinians have. So it's kind of nice to draw that similarity that both of our societies have a plethora of different ethnicities. The only difference is we would be multi-religious, whereas Jewish society would just be secular and religious. So um, both cultures have a sense of multiculturalism within their respective cultures.
There's also a lot to say that's common between us, right? Like the Israelis and the Palestinians, whether regarding food specifically, or I can say, like, for my Mizrahi side of the family, that there's a lot of things that I connect to with just Middle Eastern culture in general, specifically.
Even the parenting too is like pretty similar. You could compare that to like parenting, like food. It's pretty similar. Even in some way,
100%.
Ashkenazi parents could kind of like, in a way, they can be similar. Maybe not like in the same way as Sephardim, but they're different than like the typical like Anglo type parents you have in America. So it's like really, yeah, they are similar.
My exposure to Palestinian culture being in diaspora is probably different than what it is like being in Palestine. But um, I'd like to talk about the heritage, and I feel like it's more focused. My exposure has been focused about the connection to the land and cultivating and harvesting and things like this, more or less. In terms of similarities between the Jewish culture and the Palestinian culture, I like one thing I always heard my Jewish friends talk about was the Jewish mother guilt, which I think we also have, and that's a big similarity. And this is something we can actually, have so many conversations over. We can complain together about it.
Yeah, and there's this point that I was talking to Ammar and
On
Karma about
the
a couple days ago.
sort of multi-ethnic
Oh.
national identity that like Palestinian comprises. I mean, you have this tremendously complicated heritage where you have like Adnanite, Ishmaelite Arab tribes, Yemeni Arab tribes that had their cultural birth in the Naqab and like the Gav region and desert, and then moved back in the Fasastid era. And the Palestinian identity really is this like heritage of just the descendants of people who were there, and that's everything from like Arab tribes that moved in and back, and these clans that sort of built up a lot of the cities that you see today, and the villages, and whether it's in the times of like Zahir Omar in Akka, or Bethlehem, Jenin, Nablus, all the old cities in particular. I mean, you have people who, I mean, can look at some of the buildings in the land, and I mean, they have like a great grandfather who built it, and it's extremely inclusive in the sense that it didn't really emerge as a distinct. It sort of emerged as a really distinct nationalist identity, although it had some earlier history in like the times of Muhammad Ali Pasha, but it didn't really refer to like a strong nationalist concept until really in response to the conflict, where all the people who had lived in the land, these different clans, the Tuqans, the Jarrars, the Nimers, Barghouthis, all these different clans with different histories. Some having migrated there in the Crusader era, some having been there since Roman times, some having moved more recently. It had this like complicated interplay and this complicated relationship, but now they sort of forged a common identity and a common nationalist concept after the dissolution of the Ottoman Empire, and that's really sort of what they all have in common. I mean, it can even include ethnic Jews and Samaritans and Turks and Circassians. So it's really like a loose ethno-national group in the sense that there's all this intermarriage and shared heritage between all the people who live there. But fundamentally, it's a nationalist movement.
Yeah, I
Can you
think
guys
in
hear me?
terms,
Oh, sorry. Oh no,
go
go
ahead.
ahead. That's
Amr,
fine.
you were talking about, you were talking before
Okay.
about,
Oh, it's fine. Yeah, I just wanted to, talk about what Amar said. Like, if you look at the Palestinian dialects, like it's an extremely small land, but like if you go to like the next village, it might sound completely different. And especially in the diaspora. So like I grew up in Amman till I was 7. So I grew up in a Palestinian community there, and like you have people from Ramla, from Al Khalil, Hebron, and all over the place really. And you kind of like ever since the Nakba, there was like this like mixing, of distinct like subcultures present. That just I guess added more, to the culture over time. Just wanted to add that.
What does
I,
like being Palestinian mean to you guys? When I say you guys, I mean the Palestinians, of course.
so, for me, it has been associated with the struggle for justice. That's what it has been associated with. But also, again, I go back to the connection to the land. There's that, and it's not about the land. It's a different thing. Perhaps we will talk about this later. But one thing I feel I identify in Palestinians in diaspora is their need to cultivate the land around them. So, like for example, my all of my uncles have their own houses, and they're obsessed with having a garden and a producing garden, a garden that actually brings produce. Um, and I think that's part of their nostalgia for what their life has been or could have been like, and that's been my perception, being born and raised here to a Palestinian family. Um, but yeah, mostly right now I feel it's about the national aspiration, which I think came about as a reaction to the conflict, to how this whole thing started from the very beginning.
What
Kind of
Palestinian
reminds
means to
me.
me. Oh, sorry. I was just going to say, what Palestinian means to me is being a part of a multi-ethnic, multi-religious, inclusive society that embraces uh, our multiculturalism, but at the same time, it's cultivating that culture on the back of having been demographically replaced or reversed, and spread out into the diaspora. So, like a lot of our diaspora culture, I would presume anyway, would have been formed off the back of that, and that sort of has like obviously created some sort of need for diaspora Palestinians to reconnect and to figure out. So it's like trying to learn a culture that we've been sort of denied by the virtue of the history that has happened. And so I believe that we have a strong opportunity in this age and this time to come and form a strong foundation on what it means to be Palestinian, and how that identity can coexist with our Jewish cousins who have the same right of self-determination that we do, and that we would like to see in the near future, hopefully. Any of the other Palestinians?
Yeah, I like Omar wants to say something. Right?
It's fine. No, like if you're in the like if you join the diaspora, especially here in the United States, like it's like because there's so much, I guess you can call it assimilative forces outside. You tend to like you get very excited when you meet other Palestinians because they have some shared story, with you, and like depending on where you live. Like originally, I'm from the South in the U.S., so because like land and I guess closer knit families are more common in the South. You tend to retain that aspect, of like it fits very well with Palestinian culture. So it's like I don't know how to explain it, but like whether it's the food, how we talk, our mentality for better or for worse, like it's all included in what it means to be Palestinian. So
Karma or
The
Omar?
Palestinian aspiration,
Co- co-
for
uh,
self-determination.
hold on, Danny. I just want to give Amar and Karma the opportunity to respond to that question as well.
Karma, do you want to take the lead or do you want me?
You go first, Ahmad.
I mean, what does it mean to me? I don't know. I grew up in a very like a clan, strong sense of like a clan, or a connection to sort of a particular village, a particular town, and then like an ancestry. And so there's a real sense of just like I don't know. You're just like walking around a place that your father or your grandfather or your great grandfather literally built. So it's hard to explain. I mean, it's not the food, it's not the language. It's literally just the only place in the world that's home. Um, I'm overseas at the moment, and it's like the colors are different everywhere else. Like literally, the world is a different color. And yeah, I think it really is about a very profound connection to the land and not defining your sense of self, which is, I think, a big part of the identity as well. Like it's a collectivist society. You were born and you know who you are. It's in your last name. It tells you, you know, your ancestry to some extent and your story. When you got there, when you left, for a lot of the Arab tribes, I mean, not till not very long ago, there was still like a Qaisi Yemeni conflict. People, tribes that were still had rivalry based on their heritage from 800 BC, like literally whether they were, from the Mustarab, like, or pure Arabs that are from Yemen, and they sort of carried that over. And then you have like a bit like the Houthis and other old families who weren't even necessarily ethnically Arab, who pick and could like literally pick a side, and have been there for like 1,000 years. So it's hard to explain. I mean, I remember being able to talk to my grandfather, tell him the name of anyone in town. He would tell me, and he knows where they're from and what their history is and what their dealings with them have been from. So, I mean, yeah, it's your whole sense of self. Um, and then beyond that, I think Qadiyya and the struggle is a big part of what Palestinian means to a lot of people. I mean, that's what brought all these clans together who didn't necessarily all get along. There was a sense of unity. And one of the things I think Palestinians hate most is the inqisam, the factionalization that exists today. Because the strongest part of the identity is the sense of a shared struggle, as well as a shared sense of, this is who we are because we're kind of in this together. That's the best way I can put it.
That strongly parallels a lot. I feel like the Jewish experience in a way, which sort of our identity was sort of forged when we were expelled here sort of multiple times and scattered all around the world and sort of developed, half identities. Like Ashkenazi Jews were like half European, half Israelite or Judean, and the Mizrahi groups and all the different groups sort of saw ourselves as part of one family, but each one of them was sort of, become sort of splintered and develop some of their own, mixed identities. And then sort of this belief that that you wanted to return to this land and how meaningful that was, and also to return to the people that you connect with and that you feel that you have something common with.
To get off what
Yeah,
Rock
I
was
also
saying,
feel an affinity.
you could go first. It's okay.
I just feel an affinity with what you guys are saying because it feels just so similar. Raised in LA, like I always felt different. I never felt American, or just because others told me I wasn't American. And I remember when I came to Israel, I was 16. I was born in Israel, but I left when I was like a baby. And I came home. I came to Israel, a place that I didn't talk to my family here. I didn't really know much about it. But the second I landed, I just felt at home. I felt something that I never felt in the diaspora. It's just this sense of safety of, oh, I belong here. This is what I haven't felt for however long I was in the States. And to have also that multicultural like meeting between some Jews from all around the world. You have literally from all around the world. So you have just a globe in Israel, which is amazing because you are just one nation is built of people from all like shapes and colors and thoughts and ideologies, and it's just exciting. I don't know how to explain it differently, but it's exciting. Every time you go out, you meet someone, you see something, it's exciting. And yeah, I think that the Jewish identity in general has been built on living in the diaspora and our longing and our yearning to return home. And I think the establishment of Israel, despite how it might have been established, was a dream come true that
To
we
add to
waited
what
for
Dan,
so long.
yeah, to add to what Danny said, it's also that we've lived for like 2,000 years in diaspora. A lot happens, and it kind of really like it's cool how it reflects how similar Palestinians are. So we've also like there isn't like an exclusive Ashkenazi diaspora and exclusive Sephardi and Mizrahi, because they actually also integrated with each other too. Like, for example, in the 13th century, when Jews were getting kicked out of Germany, they moved also to Spain before the Spanish had the Inquisition, and they would name themselves the Ashkenazim. Their last name will be Ashkenazi. And there's a lot of Jews today with the last name Ashkenazi because they came to Spain as from the Rhineland, which is Ashkenaz. And since then, you have like a mix. So in Spain, it's not just Sephardim, it's also Ashkenazim. And they come and they develop a new culture. And it's something that's been happening for 2,000 years. And I think it's like the Palestinians could definitely like at least, like relate to that in a way. And that's like, it's really cool how these two cultures are so captivating and really unique in their own way, but similar.
I think in a lot of ways it's like
Omar? Yeah, Omar, when
Are
is that?
you?
Yeah, I'm here. I think like the being Palestinian to me is having this strong attachment to a conflict that you grew up into. So like basically, I'm not like from the diaspora. So like I was born and raised in Gaza, for example, and I've witnessed the wars and all of that. So I think like what unifies Palestinians is this strong attachment to a just cause eventually, because you're grown into oppression in the West Bank, for example, and Gaza I've grown into wars and all of that. So like what unites us, what defines Palestinians in these areas is basically the struggle for justice, or at least that's to me. Like let alone the heritage and the history of the Palestinian people. So like that's basically it. To me, being a Palestinian is having this strong sense of nationality that you have you have to fight to say like to say the least to exist there in this day and age, which is something I don't like to see, but it is what it is. That's it.
I have a question for
So
Palestinians, if that's okay. Um, if like, would you see in any way just the simple concept of a Jew being born in the land that you like identify as Palestine? Would in any way, like just regardless of their ancestry, would you in any way see them as Palestinian or?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the thing is, there are like the Sumerians. Correct me if I'm wrong. but prior to Zionism, there was a Sephardi community. Palestine under the Ottoman Empire had a Jewish Jewish rabbinate. Hakam, I have to Google it to remember the name. Hakam Boshi, I think. Hakam Bashi.
Jason, do you think that sort of translates into today in your mentality? Because I feel like, I mean, Jews today don't call themselves Palestinians, but I know like a ton of Jews that I know have at least one of their great grandparents has been in here for like 12 generations, 17 generations, something like that. That's like all over. So there's plenty of us that have roots here for a really long time also. But they don't call themselves Palestinian anymore. They call themselves Israeli, sort of before everyone was Palestinian. Then at some point, like the Christians and Muslims took the name Palestinian and the Jews just took the name Israeli, and that's sort of where leads us to where we are today.
Can I?
Oh. Hello? Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Yeah, I think in terms of, if we're talking about the geography and we're referring to historical Palestine, we're all from the same land, right? And when it comes to the identity, now that we're talking to each other, it seems that we can draw a lot of similarities from both of our experiences. But I think if we're framing it within the contemporary definition of Palestinian identity, it might be a different case. If we're talking about the struggle right now, it's a different thing. I don't know if that makes sense. But yeah, I mean, eventually, I think we both have that same connection to that land, right? And this is where we can agree at one point. This is what we can agree on. In terms of defining a common identity between us, I think that would be part of reconciliation later on, or as we reconcile.
But
so
to answer your question short,
Oh.
To answer your question short, I think
okay.
I've met and I've had conversations with a number of Palestinians that would be perfectly comfortable with Jews being a part of Jewish people being a part of our society. But it's just like, why would they when they have Israel? Except you still do have Jewish people that exist within Palestinian society, and I think an example of those would be the Sumerians.
So to really address your question, like we've had, like if you look at the Armenian genocide and the Circassian genocide beforehand, like we've had very distinct populations move in the region and like to some extent assimilate-ish, like they speak Arabic, but they're still obviously Armenian and Circassian. So like it depends. I don't know if that's really applicable today because there is an Israeli nationality. So yeah, I mean it's possible. You know.
Something that was common between the answer of the Palestinians was the struggle for justice. And I think that Israelis sees justice in a different light than Palestinians. For me, when I hear justice, I think of Jews like to the sea, and then Palestinians taking over from the river to the sea. So like, what does justice mean for you as Palestinians? What would you say to an Israeli?
So if I may answer this or address it, I think it's sad that we are at a point where my demand for justice and yours as a population that has been subjected to persecution over history, both demands are framed within a zero-sum game. Eventually, we're both human beings, right? What I demand in terms of justice is civil liberties, civil rights, being treated as a human being. That's my demand for justice. It doesn't exclude people. Just if it actually excluded people, it's not justice anymore. it doesn't follow the right definition for it. So the thing with the, from the river to the sea, and being thrown into the sea, it's a really tragic perception to have it. It really needs, it needs conversations, more conversations like this, for our struggle to be explained as it needs to be. And as I said, it doesn't exclude anyone. It shouldn't exclude anyone. What I want is just a life with dignity, to be considered a human being worth, a human being of value and worth a dignified life. That's it.
Just real quick, someone asked me a question. Where did I get that perception? So I can only speak for myself, but I had seen a lot of videos
Can
of
I?
these fundamental. Yeah, of course. I was just answering a question.
Amar, are you having trouble? Were you hearing Danny just now? So, Amar, it seems like you're having trouble hearing people. Maybe you can't hear this either. Danny, finish up. I'll speak to Amar and Kim so we can get to the bottom of it.
So basically, like, I saw through media, through YouTube, through different channels, a lot of speeches, hate speeches from fundamentalist leaders, or just what would seem like radical to us, that have this kind of like hate speech and, anti-Semitic propaganda, and not necessarily anti-Zionist. And you're just, when we see these speeches, so this is what I saw, right? So I saw Jews from the river to the sea, and the two-state solution is only a temporary solution until we get the Zionists out of the land. And so you don't really hear, I never really heard the narrative until I really started opening dialogue with Palestinians, that justice for them just means civil rights, human rights. And then you're just like, okay. So that was just to answer the question asked.
Absolutely.
Well,
and I think, it's, sorry.
No, it's okay. I was just gonna say something like, also as an Israeli too. So to confirm what Danny's saying, like, all of us see this, right? You follow any type of Jewish or Israeli media, and they'll show like from memory, I think what it's called, like that. It's Middle Eastern Media Watch, and they watch like schools, all that stuff. I think us and the Palestinians can agree, or at least in this discussion, they can agree that both of us don't like Hamas and Fatah. So if we both agree on this and agree that most of the hateful speech that's being taught right now, if there's not as much in the West Bank, but with Hamas there is, if we could together, we can agree that at some point they need to go, and we can establish a better Palestinian leadership, I don't think there will be as much of a concern that we're going to be driven into the sea. We know that we are like strong as people. We have advantages, like geographic advantages and military advantages. That's obvious to see. Like, but on the same time, we will always have this fear. But if Hamas goes, the education, that's a terrible system goes, we'll be very comfortable with, doing big things. I think, at least for a lot of the Israelis.
Can you guys hear me again? I think I dropped out.
Yeah.
I just want to respond, like, sort of right to what's sort of being said. Like, the great irony of the conflict, we were talking about identities before, is that Jewish people are saying, Daniel was saying, you have an identity defined by being in exile. And it is sort of like the experience of the Palestinian people of the state of Israel and the Zionist movement has been exile. And that's like what all our poetry and all our literature is about. It is, it is about being cast out from Eden, right? Sense of dispossession and of being in the diaspora. So it's kind of like one of the great ironies of conflict. As far as when people talk about river to the sea, it's as simple as, we're not from the West Bank or Gaza. If you look at a map of the Nakba, we're from the entire country. You know, we're from villages near Akka, Khalil. You know, villages now that are basically. I mean, Omar can speak to this as well. But you know, you have these villages that have been. Every attempt is being made to erase from history. I mean, you've got like soccer fields and adventure parks being built on top of houses that some of these people are like still alive. Like their parents, their parents and their grandparents are still alive. They remember being from those villages, and you've got like an adventure park being built on the ruins of this place that they knew as home. I mean, just try to put yourself in that same position. It's you it seems like an identity that has created an identical identity. I mean, so much of it is about being the diaspora. Heaven forbid we're out of there for 2,000 years, and you know we come back to the land. Like I think there can be empathy eventually on the Palestinian side for that aspect of the Jewish identity, in the sense that it is so fundamental to who we are. But I think while we are in the state that we are in today, for the average Palestinian, and this differs depending on when someone's in the diaspora, we aren't ready to care, because this isn't a conflict that's in the past. You know, you're not asking people to forgive something that happened a long time ago. This is something that they're living through today. And so I personally feel like I see a lot of these like attempts to bridge people and like bring together connections. And I think that, well, at least what I see in Palestinian society is frankly like we don't respect those kinds of interactions unless they are built on the basis of some kind of justice. It's for the average Palestinian, it's different for people living in the diaspora. It's different for people who are coming from a place of pragmatism, and the younger generation is a little bit different. But ultimately, there's a sense of it feels like you're being an Uncle Tom. You know, you're sitting there, you're speaking to somebody who is your oppressor, and we are a collectivist society. So we struggle to see. I can look at you as an individual. I can look at Dani and Rafi and Daniel and Emil, and I can speak to you as an individual. But ultimately, you also represent a collective. And so, I think for these conversations, in order to get what I say, like the average Palestinian, a Palestinian who cares about his country, who cares about his people, the kind of people we respect, the conversations do need to begin with an assumption of justice. And I guess if you're looking for understanding of your identity, you need to begin with an acknowledgement of their identity. And so for Palestinians, like, I mean, demands have always been fairly simple. And people have said the right of return, or some version thereof, doesn't mean millions of people flooding back overnight, but it means that you have fundamentally enshrined in law this idea of aliyah, that you're going to have any Jew anywhere in the world return to the land, based on the premise that having been exiled 2,000 years ago, they have a right to return. And to Palestinians exiled 70 years ago, it's like offensive. It's just like, why is this a fundamental right? But for for someone's grandfather, it's not. So that something to that effect would be a starting point. Yeah. Go ahead, Izzy.
No, that's the thing. As I talked earlier on, both of our existences have been framed within a zero-sum game. My existence threatens the existence of the Israelis and the other way around, right? And that's a perception on both sides. It's funny, Danny, that you mentioned that when people talked about two-state solution, it was the assumption that this is the start and then they're going to take more, right? We also have that perception on our side when it comes to negotiating with Israelis. We think, okay, if we say yes to this, they're going to take more. There's a lot of mistrust at this point, and there's a history behind that, right? But we need to, I think it's really important for us to actually move beyond this definition that it is a zero-sum game. My fight for justice means the fight for your justice as well, and vice versa. This is one thing, one perception that needs to change at one point.
Would you all like to move to some solutions, practical steps forward? So I heard someone starting to speak. If you want, feel free to share, and then let's just whoever's going to speak, next.
Can I just quickly respond to something in the text chat?
Yeah, sure. Wait, Amar, sure, go for it. And whoever was about to speak, feel free to say your part. Just find a way to lead what you say into the next topic, which will be solutions and practical steps forward.
I don't know whether that was addressed to me, but someone's explaining this idea that I think they took issue with the fact that I said Zionism, and that it just means, you know, that there should be Jewish determination. I mean, first of all, for the average Palestinian, again, for the average Palestinian, they are not willing to get invested into your narrative and your history, given their position in the conflict, unless you're starting from a position of being invested in theirs. But that said, for us, it really doesn't matter, because when you look at the land, we are not Jordan or Egypt or some other country, you know, that you can kind of negotiate with. We're in the same land. The land that you are asking for self-determination over includes another people. And so self-determination means self-determination. And you can't take any ethnic group anywhere in the world and go, let's give that group self-determination and exclude a different ethnic group living in the same land. So for there to be self-determination for the Jewish people, there needs to be self-determination of the Palestinian people. Otherwise, that's not self-determination. I mean, that's just, you know, that's literally an apartheid.
Now, is it not?
It's a temporary thing. It's just, yeah, it is. I personally don't think you can split it, but either way, it's just like self-determination means self-determination for everyone. That everyone in a particular land is able to pick their government, their country. Taqrir al-Masir, like in Arabic, like. So yeah, I understand what the term means for you guys, but our experience of the term, that's what it is. It's ultimately exclusion, and yeah, and that can change, but that's what it is today.
Yeah, so I was gonna. Oh,
Yeah.
sorry. You go ahead.
I just wanted to answer like something Tobias asked me. What I'm thinking after having moved from France, and to be honest, I was just 11 when I moved here. It's like I came with my parents; they chose it, and I want to say that I almost didn't know anything about Palestinian before I moved here. Like I just knew there was someone called Palestinian, and I learned everything on the ground. And my parents also didn't really know something about it. They didn't learn about the history before coming here. We just knew about our story and that we wanted to come back in this land. And we actually at this time, when before I learned about the story, we thought about the Palestinian as Arab. Like we just thought about every Arab as one entity. And I think that one of the problem we have with many Israelis that we just see Arabs as one entity, like Iraqis, all Arabs, we see it as one entity. So that way also we are afraid because we think one day every Arab can group up and just put us out. And that also what the idea of Pan-Arab is, but it didn't work and probably won't work because it's not one people completely. They're different culture. So yes, that was my answer.
Yeah, so I was going to say something in regards to the whole thing about justice and what we would want. I mean, like the whole point of self-determination is that each team gets to decide where they ought to live, who gets to rule over them, and what the shape of their borders ought to look like. It's whatever the team is comfortable with, depending on the circumstances at hand. See, the biggest note in the Israel-Palestine debate is that for far too long, Palestinian determination has lacked the word self before it. You know, we're not the ones choosing where we wish to have a state. Outsiders are choosing it for us. So, you know, whether it's some Zionists that want to send us to Jordan, and others who want to keep us under the status quo without citizenship, or others that will, suggest a two-state solution that would sort of tear families apart, coming to think about it, depending on where you live. So, I guess like the whole point of self-determination is that we get to choose like where we want to live, and that other people don't decide that for us. Now, in terms of like future solutions, I mean, there are currently like 5 million Palestinians living stateless in statelessness. 3 million in the West Bank, 2 million in Gaza. I mean, not counting the Palestinians in the diaspora. We like, I guess what we need a way is to be able to have our self-determination, to be able to elect our own leaders and decide where we want to live and everything like that, just as Jews get to have their self-determination. I think, both of us have valid connections to the land. And, everyone actually uses the term connection without actually defining what it even means, So, let's define connection. Remember, like, a connection is really in the eye of the beholder, in a sense. A connection for an Aboriginal Australian means, continuously living on the land called Australia for 40,000 years. They never left. They stayed here until Europeans came and outnumbered them through demographic reversal. In an African American that lives in a white society, but chooses to identify as African American, this is their way of showing connection with Africa. But contrast this with white South Africans in, say, Johannesburg, who usually denounce their English or Dutch ancestries and insist that you should recognize them as full-on Africans, who just happen to be light-skinned. That's their connection. So you can't apply the African Americans criteria to the white South African, nor can you apply the white South Africans criteria to the African American. Each is entitled to work out what connection means to them. Some cultures celebrate their distant heritage, like African Americans, and others distance themselves from their, distant heritage. So whose criteria is better then? There's no better or worse. It's, whatever works for you, you get to decide what connection means for you. So, if we're going to agree if we agree, that Jews get to decide what that connection means to them, that means Palestinians also get to decide what that connection means to us. And I think one of the things that I would like to develop a consensus on is that we can agree that, I think all of us in this room agree that all of us have a connection to that land. And therefore, we should both work towards the self-determination of both of our peoples without the compromise, or not at the expense of the others. So, in terms of how do we achieve justice, is working to end the current statelessness of the Palestinians on that side, and to give them true self-determination through a way of one, dialogue, and efforts to change the current realities on the ground. And it has to be like, we have to ignore the radicals on the other side. Like you said, Danny, you'll often see radicals on the Palestinian side talk about, wanting to liberate the whole of Palestine at the expense of Israel. And I'm sure, like, trust me, you can find the exact same thing on the Palestinian side, hearing like the more radicals on the Zionist side, wanting to drive Palestinians into Jordan. So the way you deal with them is you just ignore them and watch people like us, and connect with people like us. Because if you do listen to them and give them the time of day on your television, you end up becoming radicalized and polarized in the complete opposite direction. And the same for Palestinians. Hearing rhetoric that is anti-Palestinian will do the same. So it's up to us to ignore the radicals on both sides and come together as Jews and Arabs that want to coexist and outnumber both of them. But we do have to recognize that us, as on the Palestinian sides, we're the ones that are still fighting for or trying to achieve our statelessness to end, and to live under the same rights as anybody else on that land, but not at the expense of anybody else.
And how would this self-determination, like who would negotiate with the Israeli side? Because like you said, you guys are in a state of statelessness. I don't think that the PA or the Hamas really represents the Palestinian people.
Well, I think
So how would
I think the people on both sides have a responsibility to do that to some extent. I just want to add a little bit to what Jason was saying. I mean, it depends what your definition of. I do dislike this like sense that when we talk about like violence on the Palestinian side, that it's somehow mysterious or random. That this is like some. Well, I think partially maybe it's because the imagery is the same. I mean, you're looking at people wearing the same clothing as I don't know, ISIS or some other group, and you're going, oh, this is the same thing. I mean, violence on the Palestinian side is politically motivated. And that means that these militia groups and these paramilitary groups like Lehi or Ergun or the IRA or paramilitary groups all over the world, they believe that this is the way they're going to achieve a political solution. You can say this isn't the way forwards. You can say that this is this isn't an effective approach. But ultimately, I do think there is this assumption of irrationality, and the media plays a tremendous role in this. There's this perception that we're somehow brainwashed, that we're brought up. I mean, if you look at like Pal Watch or whatever, and they'll have like some YouTube video or some like clip of propaganda. Like, we were not brainwashed growing up. Most of people's motives for participation in the conflict are based on what they witnessed through their own eyes, and what was told to them by their families' lived experience. And that I'm saying this as an optimistic note, which is that for Palestinians, their political goals have been clear. Some right of return for Palestinians, self-determination, whatever that means, whether that's however you design your state is sort of secondary, but political rights within their historical homeland. For us, that's the entire land, just as for you guys, it's the entire land. I mean, I keep hearing people in text chat are mentioning Rudy, but he keeps talking about Shem, about Nablus. So it's clear that there's no the armistice lines aren't the borders, as far as I'm concerned. They're armistice lines. I mean, the map that I grew up looking at was the map of all of Palestine. I suspect you guys grew up looking at the same map. But the violence and the conflict isn't irrational, and I think the characterization of it as rational makes it seem harder to solve than it is. These people are trying to achieve political ambitions, just like paramilitary groups all over the world. When something akin to justice or something akin to the fulfillment of those aspirations are met, those groups dissolve, lose their support amongst the people. They either become political parties, rename themselves, rebrand, become Likud, in the case of Ergun, for example, or they disappear completely, or become gangs and then are persecuted by the government. So I do think, I don't know, the way people speak about it, it makes it seem like it's Islamic extremism, or it's I mean, that does exist. We've got Islamist parties, but it's beside the point. I mean, for the average kid, growing up who's like throwing rocks at a soldier, it's just natural human escalation. I mean, first people protest, right? That's the first thing you do. You go on the streets and you complain. Then they throw rocks, they get violent, you have riots. Then when that doesn't work, people are like, well, we're going to resort to violence. We need to some level of hopelessness. It's not unique to Palestinians. It's not unique to Jews. It's not unique to the Irish. It's not unique to any group of people. It's human beings. I mean, when you are totally hopeless, a human being is going to do whatever the hell he can. If he has no hope, it's just a matter of expression of anger. I'm just like, I don't know what to do. I have no other way forwards, and this is not a life worth living. I mean, the reality is, life under military rule is not something you would accept for yourself, for your friends, and for your family, and for anyone you know. And beyond that, we're Beni Adam. We're humans. We're actually, it's the exact same psychology. Palestinians are not this, bizarre, like brainwashed people. I think almost characterizing it, even the way people look at like Gaza, where there's perception that like Gaza is this like shithole, basically, and everyone there is sort of brainwashed. It's like people in Gaza are the same as the people in West Bank. Um, the fact that Hamas won an election in Gaza 14 years ago doesn't mean anything. And people in Gaza are just as educated. We have one of the highest literacy rates in the world in Palestine, highest PhD rates per capita. We are not this like brainwashed group of extremists. We're just human beings who want rights and have absolutely no political means to get there. Literally no avenue for political expression. We have no elections, no ability to protest non-violently, because when we do, we are shot. I mean, you could look what happened like the first Intifada. So like that's an optimistic note because it means it can end. That's all.
Maybe it's not that you're brainwashed. Maybe it's the fact that we just have a misunderstanding, and that is mutually inclusive. So your whole aspiration, your goals across the world, maybe people don't know about it as much as they can. Maybe us Jews, we're not even taught about the Palestinian aspirations, or the people who live also in our own homeland. So if we mutually don't even know each other's own goals, and I'll be honest, the Zionists never had a goal to remove you early on, but what they never did is two things. They never, actually tried to speak to the Palestinians about what their goal is, which creates this very alien type of mentality where it's, excuse me, they're building land, like they're building places on land that they purchased off of Palestinians. They're growing. They're not telling them exactly what they're here to do, even though for the most part it's the sense Jews who are suffering in Europe and who need to come back to the land to have refuge, proper refuge in their ancestral homeland. But the issue is that they don't tell them, so now there's hostilities. You have more hostilities. Now it's going to the Holocaust, where you need even more Jews than before in the 20s. And they really, now they're rioting. They really don't like it. They don't see what you're doing as any justification. And by the time it's the 40s, you have the creation of Lehi Irgun. It's over. It was going into chaos by the time it was in the 30s, truthfully. And I think we just don't understand each other enough. Like, we don't know anything. We don't know. We think if Danny could agree, and Izzy, you guys can agree that maybe the Palestinians don't know exactly what Ashkenazi, Sephardi, Mizrahi, actually how close they are, and that they actually belong to the land. And as Jews, we think you guys are all Arabim. We just say Arabim, and that's it. And it's not true. You're not just Arabim. You have your own clans and whatnot. And
I can admit that that's how I used to look at it. I used to go when I'm thinking about the conflict, going like, Palestinians are Arabs.
Right?
Are there like 20 other Arabic countries, Muslim countries that they can go to? That was honestly my thought. Like, I really didn't understand Europe.
Right? You see the whole map of all the Arab countries, and it's from Morocco to Iraq, and it's like it's all them Arabim, and it's like okay, maybe it's not just Arabim.
And you don't understand the obsession. I mean, it's not an obsession now. Yeah, I'm talking like where my mindset was back then. But
for sure.
Back to what Amal was saying about how violence isn't irrational. It's not that the struggle is irrational, but there are things that are inexcusable. At least on my end, and I can say it unapologetically, even if it's the minority, okay, and it's like 1 out of 1,000, there's still been, like I was telling someone on Discord earlier that when my father was 5 years old, he wanted to take a bus and he ran to the bus stop, and my grandfather chased after him and said, "You're not going on the bus," pulled him out of the bus, and the bus exploded in front of my father. Okay? When you hear stories of like, terrorists coming into Israel and like killing a whole family, right? And then killing a baby that's in the house, You're just like, this is inexcusable. This is not a struggle. This is terror. It's not a fight for struggle. It's for terror. But then I talk to Palestinians, and then they show me articles of Palestinians who actually risk their lives to save the lives of other Jewish people. That's something that I didn't get to read before.
And
Very
Feb 1 too, the massacre in 1929. It's also happened too.
Also, but very recent in 2019 or 2018, whatever, an article that I read literally a couple of days ago, just like reading up on it, that there was this rabbi who was killed in the settlements, and a Palestinian risked his life to save his wife and his children, and in turn was given permanent residency in Israel. But like, you know, so
I'll add very quickly to that on the subject of like there's certain things that are inexcusable. I mean, we can look at the second Intifada. You can look at the video of a sniper shooting a baby. It's like I don't really think there's anybody who isn't at a point in their psychology where they're sociopathic that can look at that and be like, yeah, that's fine. But it is still frustrating for Palestinians to hear that because we're just like, this isn't unique to us. It's just not unique to us. I mean, it's evil, but it's not unique to us. I mean, first of all, you can look at Jewish paramilitary groups back when they were in operation, like Lehi or Agun, for example, and they had the exact same tactics. In fact, they literally had to split off from Haganah so they could stop exercising self-restraint. So they could stop exercising, was it Havlaga? So they could basically, they could basically exercise collective punishment, revenge killings. They could attack women. They filled the trucks up with explosives and sent them into villages. I mean, these sorts of. I mean, the IRA is a great other example. Go ahead, Tanya.
70s. He also got you have to kind of technically Begin, that was Menachem Begin, and technically he would actually be better for the Palestinians because he wanted it to be one state. So just everyone, just the actual status about what is going to happen to you guys, maybe not so good. But compare it to the liberals, so Golda Meir, Ben Gurion, they were more prone and willing to do a two-state solution, and they were also more willing to work with the British to not blow up as frequently British and Arab outposts. It was mostly, if you look at a terrorist attack where a Jew would go and throw a grenade into a market and it would just blow up the market. It was usually the Lehi or the Ilgun. But you could see where it's some of them, what they think, it's good in terms of the state, but how they want to treat you and how they do their actions is not good. It's kind of like a trade-off.
Yeah. The other thing. Well, actually, go ahead, Izzy. Sorry.
No, I just wanted to say that there are three things I think we need to work on in order to start a proper conversation at one point with as many people as possible. First off, we need to, our starting point should not be treating each other as monolithic. We're not, neither of us is monolithic. Neither of us is that homogenous. For me, as a Palestinian, and this is actually part of the solution, I think, nobody actually knows what Palestinians as a collective want. We don't have any data on this. And nobody can say we want two-state solutions. Nobody can say we want a one-state solution. We don't know what we want, so we need to tackle that on our side. The other thing is empathy. Empathy is key. Empathy on both sides is very important. And we need for empathy to be established, we also need to acknowledge that context is important. Not to excuse what is inexcusable, right? But the context is important. So I think, if we want to discuss the way forward, there are things that we need to do on our side, then things that the Israelis need to do on their side, right? And then things that we need to do together. So I would like to hear, for me, I think from my side, from the Palestinian side, we need a referendum. We need to understand what we want as a collective. We need to draw a map for the future for ourselves. I can tell you personally, I don't care for statehood. I just want rights. That's it. I don't know about the rest of the Palestinians. On the Israeli side, there are a lot of conversations to be had. A lot of conversations to be had on your side, to sort of be able to, you know, sway people to understand the other side and not understand, talk about the need, our need for justice, right? And after this, like you can also talk about, I want to hear from the Israelis here what they think needs to be done on their side, and then we can talk to each other about what we can do together.
Sure. So what I think is that in terms of the violence that we mentioned, I think both sides need to stop violence as much as possible. Like definitely on the Palestinian side, it's very challenging. I understand all the suffering they're undergoing under occupation, but they really need to go, you know, full Gandhi, full Martin Luther King, full, you know, Nelson Mandela, and really say we're not going to do violence, and that'll sort of throw the ball back in the court of the Israelis in a way that we'll have to look in the mirror and take some accountability, because as soon as they and with everything that they do, we can just use the excuse while they're attacking us, so we can't solve it now. And in terms of violence, also, I would get rid of all the checkpoints like in the West Bank. We already have security coordination with the PA. That's pretty irrelevant at this point. But that won't really solve the conflict. That would just be like, okay, stopping the violence today. And then we really need, it's on this top. It's not for me to tell the Palestinians what to do, but it's for my side to get our act together and decide, make a fair offer that really is justice for both people. And for me, that's some kind of a one state or a federation. I mean, even if you think of like, you know, I live in Jerusalem. So if you wanted to have two states and you said, but we need to do something with Jerusalem, you can't really put a wall in the middle of it. There's like 1 million people here and we all live next to each other and we're not segregated now. There's no reason to segregate us because people in Tel Aviv and Ramallah can't get along with each other. That's your problem, not ours. So like if you wanted to put, you know, keep a wall and then close off and then have Jerusalem open, you could put a wall all the way around Jerusalem, but like I'm not living in a wall. We could put a wall around Tel Aviv. It's not my problem. You know,
you think the Haredim will be okay with that too?
I don't know. What do you mean? I'm not really serious. I'm not going to put a wall around Tel Aviv. You just, if you want to have any solution,
no, I meant like. I actually meant it the other way. No, Rafi, I meant it the other way. I meant it like, sure. Because do you think like, say for example, there's like Jerusalem has its own thing. Like here, maybe it would be even bigger than Jerusalem because I saw some of the pictures where the whole Confederation looked. Not the canton looked bigger.
The Federation,
yeah. So I was saying, so if there's a Jerusalem, do you actually see I can see most of the secular Jews and mostly the Mizrahi Jews and even like traditional agreeing to this and being okay with the Palestinian population for the most part. I think it's only there's some groups like the Haredim who have their own dress code for school. They have their own schools. They have their own rules. It's very even though the modesty could kind of actually reflect Palestinian modesty because they're also pretty modest people. You know, you need to make sure it reflects all the people, including the Haredim too. Like that was like the one group I was thinking like potentially there could be like an issue or something.
Sure. I think the idea that that there's going to be a bunch of Palestinians rushing to live in a Haredim community is kind of funny.
No, I meant it more in their eyes. I meant it in their eyes looking at the Arabs. So I'm asking, it's more like asking another Jew from his perspective because he's more like Rafi seems more religious than me. So I was just asking like in terms of that.
Just to what? Go ahead, Rafi.
I would say you can't really make like a separate state for Haredim. That's not really practical. And like
I know
like
I wouldn't. Now, and there's a lot of them in
whole
Bnei
section of the
too.
city. Jerusalem is it's almost like federalized anyway. There's a whole section of the city with Haredim. There's where I live, which is like Misoratim, like Mizrahim and like Ashkenazi, like Dati Lumi people, and a little bit of seculars. And then you have like an entire Arab section of the city. And people like they stay within their own neighborhoods. There's like a handful of Jews in like a few Arab neighborhoods around the old city, and there's like one neighborhood like Abu Tor, which is sort of like hip and like half Jewish and half Arab. But that's it. Like 99% of the people here are Jews and live in a Jewish neighborhood, or are Arabs live in an Arab neighborhood, or Haredi and live in a Haredi neighborhood. It's very like it's already set up like that, so we don't really need to. You don't have to force them. This is what they do naturally in this case, but you need to create an environment where all of them are okay. And like Jerusalem, even though it's not even that fair in Jerusalem, it's still like a whole lot better than, you know, comparing what's going on in Ramallah versus Tel Aviv. So that's so I think the basis of a real solution at the very least is two states with Jerusalem as the territory and capital of both those states. And Jerusalem needs to be fully open. And if Jerusalem is fully open, the whole country is fully open. You can't put a wall anywhere. And so we're basically two states with one capital that with fully open borders. That's sort of like a federation at your minimum. That's what you would need to do. And then, okay, now that we're real, if you cope with the fact that we're in some kind of confederation, federation, living together situation as a reality, now we should just talk about together, okay, what do you really want it to look like? What would best actualize my sense of Jewish identity, my connection with, you know, the Central Mountains, the Judean Samaria, Palestinian connection with places in the Negev Desert, and, you know, Advat and Alasa and all these you know, Nabatean towns and all this sort of cultural history, and find a way to let that flourish and be expressed in our, you know, shared living together, however you want to call it, and then find out what that to look like.
I like
absolutely
everything you had to say, Rafi. I guess the problem is, and maybe this is like a diaspora thing, but like, okay, the issue with this idea, I mean, so I think we can kind of sit in a group, we can talk about a solution, and I think to some extent we do need to communicate like a governance solution, because I think that changes the mindset. But as far as getting there politically, I mean, even take the example you gave of non-violent protest, like going, you know, more or less full Gandhi. That, and this is kind of where I can pass the ball already. The closest we came to going full Gandhi, you have the first Intifada, which, while I wouldn't say entirely non-violent, was at least explicitly, in terms of its leadership, the people who organized the first Intifada, that was their strategy. And so while there were some groups, the vast majority of the first Intifada was basically characterized by protests, boycotts, civil disobedience, and general strikes. And it was met with the iron fist policy. I mean, it was met with absolute brutality. You know, the first Intifada was one of the biggest loss of lives. I mean, you had like 1,600 people killed, and just an innumerable amount of protesters injured, wounded in permanent ways. But that sort of continues to this day. So if I go out to protest, to protest for something, you know, and one kid in the protest throws a rock, I'm gonna cop a rubber bullet, and that's the starting point. And if the protest gets wild, people die. I mean, a kid died literally the other week. Ali, a 13-year-old kid. He was at a protest. I mean, so this is also part of the issue. I mean, the Palestinian experience is basically hearing, you know, Israeli media say there is no peace partner, there is no one to negotiate with, Hamas this, Hamas that, the PA is too maximalist, followed by, every time we go out about and complain about something, whether it's our own government or settlements or your policies, we are met with brutality from both the PA and the IDF. And the Tansiq al-Amni bin, the security coordination between our government and yours. The reality is, for Palestinians, we see our government as we see our government as ultimately an extension of the Israeli security apparatus. So it always feels like hypocrisy. I mean, at a minimum, I think if you want Palestinians to be able to arrive at a democratic process to express their views, then I mean, when people go out to protest, when people try to achieve political change non-violently with strikes and protests and boycotts, you can't respond in that way. And that's actually how the Second Intifada started, by the way. The Second Intifada was absolutely brutal, but the first few months of the Intifada were just protests. It is always in response to carnage that the violence escalates. And it's something along the lines of the militant groups go, well, you tried it, it didn't work. So
are you talking about Elio Salon going to the Temple Mount?
No. So that started the Al-Aqsa Intifada. However, in the first few
Yeah,
months of the
I could
Intifada,
say
it was
something to that
right.
just from a Jewish perspective, but I want you to continue. And I'll say it after.
No, go ahead.
Well, the thing is, like, if you're gonna say that, even it started off with the Al-Aqsa riot and the protest and the riot. The thing is, like, fundamentally, they're not like a lot of Jews will just not have a hard time for you to tell them that this Al-Aqsa or the Temple Mount, like, which is where the number one most important part of like all of Judea, because that's where not only the temple was, but it's like the main point of the temple. It's that. It's not even just anywhere else in Jerusalem, which is the capital of Judea. So it's like what they're just like, I really don't care, no matter how much the Palestinians don't like it. Two will come back and retaliate. Three, show us how much they don't care. They're like, well, I just personally don't care, so I'll do it. If I instigate something, I know that our police force is strong enough to eventually suppress it. The only thing is that because the Palestinians went very hard in the protest and then eventually turned into a riot for the first Intifada and eventually got really bad, the Israelis kind of
Sorry, just to be clear, the first
underestimated.
Intifada was not the Al-Aqsa. It was like that
No,
was
that's
1987.
why I'm connecting it to the Al-Aqsa.
Yeah.
The
Right.
first Intifada was so bad. When the Al-Aqsa happened, they did it like, well, I'm gonna do this. If you riot, it's probably not going to be as bad as the first Intifada, which was already so bad. So they didn't see how it will go into this whole cycle of this suicide bombing, you know, rock throwing, like really like even worse than what the first Intifada was, which was so already so unimaginable in like the eyes of an Israeli in 1999 and 2000. Just to put into perspective. But that's like the reasoning why like they did it in the first place. Why like, yeah.
Yeah. I guess this tradition of like this tradition of how political protest is, how people respond to it is sort of still there to this day. Like it is ultimately. I mean, forget protests. By the way, we're not just talking about protests. I mean, people who pursue, things on the international stage or boycott movements are basically placed in, indefinite administrative detention by the security apparatus. Take your average Palestinian. If they start a political movement that the nation state sees as detrimental to their PR, I say the nation state, I mean Israel, sees as detrimental to their PR. No, I have a number of family members who were placed in administrative detention more or less indefinitely, for being part of boycott movements or PR or the International Criminal Court program. Like it's not. The reality is, as a nation state, I mean, it behaves. On the one hand, it's a functioning democracy and there's freedom of speech. It basically treats its citizens quite well, and it treats the non-citizens they occupy the same land as subhuman. And there's sort of there is no limit to. I don't know.
It denies them
It's not
access
easy.
to civilian law. It
Denies them access to civilian law, but its security apparatus also, under the guise of blurry national security, can basically go in, arrest anyone, place them in administrative detention for an indefinite period of time. And this isn't one story. This is like every single Palestinian has a family, probably has a family member or an extended family member who was just in prison for a few months with no real end date.
That's the
In
reason
administrative
why you're
detention.
anonymous right now, right? Amar and Karma.
Not to that extent. I mean, I think it's just easier, but and it's on both sides. Ultimately, it is extraordinarily difficult for there to be a political movement. I mean, we have one of the most unpopular, let's call it government policies that we've had for a while in leadership. And they're not going anywhere anytime soon because it is extraordinarily difficult to start any political movement in the region. And Israel has to take a lot of the blame for that. I mean, Bibi said it multiple times. I mean, he likes the factionalization. It's a good strategy. He doesn't want a unified Palestinian leadership. So, to some extent, there has to be pressure. You have to place pressure on your own government you can't keep telling us there's no peace partner, and then also literally preventing any political or democratic process from ever occurring in the region.
You're right, but in this time specifically, Israel's in the midst of political mayhem. If anyone who's watching or who's debating doesn't know,
it's not even stable, so they don't trust
we don't even trust our government right now. We see it. It's just, whether you like Bibi or you don't like Bibi. I personally don't like Bibi, and I keep seeing this man, Ershu, in some way, shape, or form, being elected and forming these coalitions, and even though you don't get the majority, and so there's so much.
It's a whole shtuyot. It's a lot of, the thing is that it's not civil war, but it's kind of boiling up to where it's very dysfunctional. And what usually happens is that when you're getting to a civil war, there's some type of identity crisis, so where you're questioning yourself whether you matter, whether the government cares about you and that you matter in their eyes. And you could compare it to any situation. I think with this situation too, we don't even know. It's like you have the Likud who only trusts Bibi for this fact that he has bitachon, security, and that's it. And they'll only vote for him because they think anything else, it's with Hamas, and Hamas wants to kill. It's a whole cycle. And then you get with the left, and then they really like two-state solution, for example, but they are willing to talk to maybe Fatah, but not to Hamas. It's a whole mess. It's all a big mess, and the coalition, I think personally, is really like a poison to Israel because we're tribal already. So to create to vote someone in off the basis of coalition, so you're literally telling these tribal people, form into tribes so you can all vote one another in, and then that person will rule the land. It's toxic. It leads to a whole. It leads to a whole issue, really. And I think what Danny's talking about. Yeah.
Exactly. That's what needs to start with us, because our government's not give a shit. That's how at least I feel.
Yeah.
Okay? It doesn't care about me as an individual. And during Corona, I felt that. And so if we get enough support, were you saying something? There was just a lag.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
So if we have mass support between the everyday Israeli, the more you talk about it, if it's, you, Abu Amar, and Rafi, you guys are talking about this sort of federation, one that also wouldn't threaten the demographics, which is a huge thing, right? For the Jews to never be a minority. These are things I need to talk about between us, and that would pressure it, hopefully. This is my optimistic hat on. It would pressure our governments to act differently because the people aren't taking their BS anymore. And so they kind of, in effect, lose power.
I was just going to say that then one of the steps that need to be done on the Israeli side is actually work on the existing political paradigm and change it. You actually have better grounds considering that it is a democratic state. You have better grounds to do that than we do as Palestinians right now. Once that happens, and once as Ahmad said, he mentioned that part of the reason we are incapable of forging a unified political will is the coordination between the state of Israel and the PA, right? So that needs to change. That perspective needs to change on the Israeli side. And in order for that to happen, public pressure must mount. And this is where you guys come in.
Well, and that's the question that I really fundamentally have, in the sense that, okay, we can be here in a conversation, or when I speak to someone, and I tell them the story, and I think people are used to hearing the peace activist talking point, right? They're used to hearing the same sort of stuff on the Palestinian side, but when you get into the nitty gritty of what people's lives are like, I think you actually usually in a conversation people can kind of agree. The problem is, this is just nowhere near what the average person on the street thinks. It's just not what the media is presenting to them. It's not the communication lines. And so, quite frankly, how do you get this message across to people? There is such a deeply ingrained narrative. I recently was looking at the PR coverage, 2018 Gaza protests, and the difference between our experience of that, where you have the articles I'm breeding, with the exception of some quote unquote left wing papers. And let's be real, the Israeli left has been dead for a long time. So yeah, you'll get an article from Haaretz in 972, but you'll read like the average newspaper news source, an attack on the border. And it was a fucking protest where literally 200 people died and almost 10,000 people were injured, some of whom maimed permanently, and they were basically asking for a lift to the blockade. It was the one time I can think of in recent history where Hamas was like, "Yeah, go ahead, protest, let's try it." And I mean, what do you expect the people of Gaza to walk away from that experience thinking? They're walking away from that experience thinking, "Bloody hell, more of us died during this protest than we did during the last bombing." It's and the reality is none of that got through. Literally none of that information was communicated. I looked at the PR, I looked at the YouTube videos, I looked at the signaling, the branding, all of the media, and it was basically just like conflict in Gaza. Gaza's upset about something. I mean, literally nothing was communicated. And you can talk about like the age we live in, and regardless of your political views, I think it's a weird time when, say, the president of the United States can get on TV, say something that is so demonstrably false that if you were to open Google for 5 minutes, you'd be able to see that he was lying. And that was what happened. In so many of these stories, I see the way the information is presented in Israeli media. And let's be clear, our media is no better. The only difference is A, we don't consume it heavily, and then B, we don't have an army. Yeah, I mean, you look at the difference in the media, and it's like literally Bibi would get on TV, say something that if you were to Google for 5 minutes, you'd see the footage. That's not what happened. Or there'd be newspaper articles. I mean, I was talking to a friend about this, who sent me an article from I think it was either Israel Hayom or Times of Israel, where there is the grade 2 Palestinian. It was a PA. Apparently, it was a PA textbook, grade 2 math textbook. And they had the page number and the title of the book at the top and stuff. And in this article, it was about look at how Palestinians are brainwashed into hating Jews and Israelis. Had this math problem where you have on October, the Israelis prevented this many people from going to Al-Aqsa, and you do some calculation with like how many people missed out on getting to go there. It was all not real. I mean, I don't know where they actually got the source from, but I pulled up the textbook and I went to the exact page that they put the image on. And it took me 5 minutes. And it's false. It's like,
was it the media? Like, did they find it through the media? Like the person?
They may have found it on Facebook. It may have been a draft of the textbook. I don't know.
So like, like you were talking about media before. Like, media will always profit off of the conflict. It's just the fact that first of all, Israelis also say that no, the media, like I could say maybe 40% will think that no, they're hard Bibi people will be like, no, I don't think the media is biased for Bibi. It's actually a lot more biased for like Khan 11. It's more pro lefty. It's more pro Gantz, if anything. But the point is that the media is never really there to actually educate in the first place, which is why I said it has to come from personal learning. Like, we actually have to personally learn from each other, because the media is never going to be there to do anything else but make money off of us. So I really think that, yeah, when you have Abbas, you have Bibi, who are both in there, who can both die in the next 15 years, just rich, they're going to stress, but at the same time, as long as they're working with each other to keep the situation where it's the army goes to somewhere where there's a riot, or there's a protest, and then they come back and they'll come and they'll deal with the protest in whatever manner, whether it be violent, whether it be somewhat violent, complete brutality. It doesn't matter. Bibi's fine with that, because Bibi knows that enough outlets will either say it's horrible, which will get people angry at Bibi, but they will want some type of conflict with the other people, who's the Likud. And the Likud says, yeah, maybe occupation's okay. Maybe this is all we got. There is no solution. So you see how they're basically trying to make money off people fighting each other. And it's just, they won't see that. Like, the media is never going to help us understand that our aspirations are very similar, and that we can live with one another, and that the only way we can really do anything is by learning from each other, really.
Can I interject something?
Yeah, real quick before you do, it's just we're closing in on 2 hours now, so we'll have an opportunity for everybody to share some final thoughts. Final thoughts, and then answer the question: chocolate hummus, yes or no? I'm assuming most people here haven't tasted it yet, but what are your initial thoughts? We're actually going to do a taste test video this Thursday. It will be published on the page coming up. As you all think of your final thoughts, I'll give a few more announcements while we're at it. So first of all, this was very inspiring. It really was. And the conversation will continue in the Discord. You can find a link to the Discord in the description. If you want to get in touch, the after party in Discord will be an opportunity to speak to any of our panelists one-on-one, and you can also reach out to them personally there if you want to continue the conversation. If you're new to the page, please like and subscribe. We do awesome content every week. Our goal is simple: connect people who are currently in conflict with one another. Our main focus is the Israel-Palestine conflict. Being an Israeli, it's close to home, close to heart. This Thursday, for the great debate, we actually have Izzy and Danny coming on to debate one another. So this was just a little warm-up session for them, but it's gonna be good. If just some thoughts of how I feel about this conversation. Many people ask, they say, do you think conversations can make a difference? Can conversations change the face of the conflict? Well, the way I look at it is, whatever political solution we end up having, it will only work if we can build some kind of trust with one another. There's such a deep, deep mistrust of one another, and that mistrust manifests itself in the form of fear and hate. With the current levels of mistrust with one another, it seems like every political solution will fail before it even gets started because of how conflicted our populations currently are. So these dialogues can change that paradigm. Most Israelis don't know any Palestinians personally. They don't have Palestinian friends. Most Palestinians don't have any Israeli friends. The only thing we know of one another is what we learn on the media or from our politicians, both of which have some interest to sensationalize what we hear. Politicians or media will only focus on the worst members of society, the most extreme ones, because sensationalism sells. So from a young age, both populations are getting a very specific and false notion of who their neighbor is. These dialogues can change a lifetime of upbringing in a single session. So that's what we do. We're going to continue to do these. If anybody's watching this and you want to be on a future session, reach out to me. You can see contact information in the description. You'll see a little Linktree link with all my contact information. We'd love to have more guests on. The idea of the roundtable is you don't need to be a politician. You don't need to be an activist. You don't need to be a scholar. You just need to be an individual who's affected by the conflict, and you need to be willing to make some effort towards progressing peace. Everyone's invited. It was a great pleasure to have you all here. And with that, we're going to give it up for a little final thoughts and my question about chocolate hummus. So take it as you wish.
Yeah, so I was actually, I wanted to, I think Adar covered a decent amount of what I wanted to say, but there's always like the next steps. Let's say we talk, a decent amount of the population connects, I guess trust levels increase and so on, but how do you overcome human nature of saying, okay, this might be nice, but like is that enough for a human to say, okay, I actually want to invest some time into doing this? Like, let's say you live far away from an area that's not as affected by the conflict. Like, what is that like one motivation factor that would get you to actually want this change? Because I mean, if it's not affecting you and you can not spend any energy on this, because I mean that's just human nature. Like what how can we get to that level, like past education, building trust? How can we get to actually wanting to change something? That's really like the issue that I've had. I don't want to end it on a negative note, because hopefully people can spin this in a more positive way, but I just wanted to bring that out there, because human nature in general is a huge part of this conflict anyway.
Um, I mean, on the Palestinian side, obviously the diaspora is different than people who live there. For us, the motivation to change it is because we're in the situation that we're in.
Yeah.
We need to change. This is our entire lives. Although I actually think there is too much acceptance amongst our own society, and we're not going to be able to fully unpack this discussion in this conversation. I really can't stress enough how disconnected the average Palestinian is from this conversation. We have such a hard time. There are Palestinians who will speak to Israelis, but we usually don't respect a lot of the ones who do. And it's because they're lying. I mean, they are basically, no, they're basically, there's a cognitive dissonance that's required in order to basically just jump right to the point in the conversation where you are talking about peace or shared experience. I mean, for most Palestinians, it feels like and we can talk about solutions, we can talk about governance, that they'll pay attention, albeit a lot of people don't like to talk politics, frankly. But they'll answer your questions about what their aspirations are and what for them is justice. But from the average Palestinian in the less wealthy areas, I mean, it's one thing to be someone who goes to a private school in Ramallah. It's another thing to be from the camps or from, frankly, most of the country. There is a big disconnect there. And it is because there is so much acknowledgement missing for us to begin the conversation. And I think my experience speaking to Israelis is there is sort of a desire for us to acknowledge your history before you met us. It's like, yeah, okay, I've spent some time and I've went and learned and understood Jewish history, but I chose to do that. For the average Palestinian, that is not something that they're going to do. So I can get your identity, but for the average Palestinian, it's tough for them to give a shit when they go, you are asking me to understand your identity and your history before you met me, a Palestinian, the tribes, the clans that we're here. So start by acknowledging our experience of what happened from the day we met you. It's not the 48 war between you guys and every other Arab state. It's not the Arab-Israeli conflict. It is literally the experience of these villages. I mean, most of the people who were expelled from the land were fallahin. These were farmers. These are people who literally just they were like caught in the crossfire between every Arab leader's desire to take a piece of the country, and you guys. I mean, it's just basically it. And
They were
for
the
us, it was
easiest
just,
victims. They were the easiest victims if you think about it.
and for us, frankly, our only role in the Arab-Israeli conflict was, we wanted to fight, we weren't able to fight, but I mean, people were like literally caught in the crossfire, and it's like from our entire experience. I mean, someone earlier mentioned that Herzl wanted to live together. Well, he never got a chance to be part of, the early Zionist movement in Palestine, so we'll never know how he would have handled it. But I can speak to our newspapers, Jaridat Palestine, in the early 1900s. It was a taboo both under Ottoman law and under the nature of our society for them to say they were opposed to Jewish immigration. So they made quite specific what their grievances were, and they raised it towards what we saw as a political party, and it was the Zionist movement. Now, again, I understand for Jewish people, Zionism means a totally different thing to you than it means to us, but you also have to understand what it means to us. And the author Isa and Jaridat Palestine made it very, very clear. In the Palestinian newspaper, made it very, very clear. He sees a political movement aimed at establishing a state here at the exclusion of the Palestinian people. That was our experience of what you were here to do. We didn't catch on until these papers spread this idea that is what was going to happen. There was going to be a state here that doesn't represent your culture, that gives one people self-determination. It fulfills one people's dream and creates another people's nightmare. Sure, I can learn your history. I can know what happened in the Romans. I can know what the temple means to you. I can know, tomorrow in Jerusalem. I can learn this history. Asking the average Palestinian to want to learn this history is impossible when they feel like, well, we've known you guys for, you guys being the people who came in like the first, second, third Aliyah. There were Jewish. There was a Jewish presence in this land the last 2,000 years. I mean, in and out, depending on the political situation, depending on the conflict. So it's really specifically what we identify as Zionism and Israeli people. Our experience has always been negative. I mean, we really can't point to a moment in history where we went, there was a moment of allegiance or a moment of, I mean, plenty of Arab families had positive experiences with the Jewish people in Khalid, in Hebron, which is why when the Hebron massacre happened, there were still Arabs there who protected them. For the average Palestinian, you know, we may have positive experiences outside the country, but ultimately, as collectivist people, we see you as a collective. People in Jerusalem may have interactions with you know positive Israelis or you know people who just treat our rights like Beni Adam, like just another person. Like if you cared about another person's culture, history, and identity, we would extend you the same courtesy. Jordanians, look, the Jordanian government killed many Palestinian people, and today we say إحنا شعب واحد. There is no grievances between us. We are one deeply bonded people that, I mean, we love each other beyond the ability to separate the identities. So it's not like history doesn't matter. It's just you have to look at the differences, and it is a total acknowledgement of the other person's identity, as well as being as willing to fight to protect their rights as you. I mean, I don't see an in between here, frankly. Like either you are willing to fight to protect the rights of another person in this country, or you can't be in the country together. Because so long as it's a zero-sum game, kind of like what Izzy said earlier, then we are never going to be on the same playing field. Because Israelis are going to say we are militarily stronger and we are powerful. So your maximalist demands, I think someone said that it's in the chat, are not going to be accepted by us. And Palestinians are going to say, we don't give a shit. We don't care. We're not a foreign nation state. You can't negotiate with us because we're just people inside your own country. So we are going to complain about this in 200 years and 300 years and 500 years and 1,000 years. Ireland didn't forget their struggle after 800 years. We won't. Or you can today, right now, this generation, take something that is a dream for one people, a nightmare for another, and live up to the same standards that you claim your state, you know, holds to care about, which means you know, the preservation of cultures, preservation of identity, survival, the diaspora, exile from Eden. These are the things that the two national movements have in common. That's what I see missing from most peace talks. I mean, just get to the bottom of what people feel, and that's it.
Thank you, Abu Amar. Chocolate hummus, though. I want to hear from Omar and Amar about chocolate hummus, and then we'll move on to the next.
Look, so it really depends on what it's meant to serve. When I think of hummus, I think of an actual meal, you know, at breakfast, sometimes for lunch, and sometimes for dinner. But I don't know. I've never tried chocolate hummus. I can't, like, hummus always has this acidic taste and this like richness that I just don't think should be fused with chocolate ever. So
I just yeah, I think when you say chocolate hummus, it's the perfect representation of this postmodernist world we live in. Because hummus is hummus. Hummus is chickpea. Hummus in Arabic means chickpea, so you can't just change that. All right, so don't change it, please.
Has anyone here eaten chocolate hummus? Is it really a thing that people are?
No, I'm afraid to get it. My kids have enough chocolate, so if I get to eat most of this chocolate, more to choose. Sounds like chocolate spread, and I'll claim it's healthy.
like, I accept chocolate halawa. That's fine. That's okay. It's good. I'm not gonna deny that. But halawa is meant to be sweet, so
Exactly,
Yeah.
chocolate and halawa mix.
Hummus is not chocolate.
So, you know, to answer your question, Danny, I used to make this cookie dough out of chickpeas. There's like a vegan cookie dough recipe, and it's delicious. It tastes like cookie dough, but here's the catch: it's high in protein, it's vegan, and it's healthy. So then when I saw chocolate hummus and whatever, it's just an Americanized version of hummus, right? They need the wheels of capitalism need to keep churning out these new products. So chocolate hummus is up next, but I can obviously understand why Middle Easterners would be offended by something so outrageous. But if I'm going to take a guess, I'm going to say it probably tastes pretty good. And if it happens to be a high protein, vegan, and delicious dessert, well, I'd say that's a win for humanity. Whether it should be called hummus or not, that's another question. That's up for debate. Maybe we'll dedicate a full episode just to that.
All right. So
I think we can solve the conflict by uniting in hatred of chocolate hummus. Which is
Against
disgusting.
chocolate
By
hummus.
the way,
Yeah.
thing.
That's a very
Although
good
that would
starting
it be?
point.
It's gonna be in
That's
the
a
in
good
the,
starting
the preamble of the
Yeah.
Constitution, just a ban.
I have never tried
I'm kind of
chocolate
curious
hummus,
now.
but what I have tried, and if anyone can get access to Vegemite, get toast Vegemite. It's like a famous Australian
No.
spread. It's
So
like
nice.
really salty, and then put hummus like on top of it.
I
And just eat it.
Oh,
And
no.
like
heard
the
that better.
the saltiness from the Vegemite like adds to the hummus, and it's beautiful if you like Vegemite. And then on a more serious note, I think one of the things that is like evident from this discussion is that clearly we have been taught things we haven't been taught about the other side. Like we haven't been taught things about the other side which would help us see the other side's narrative. Like it's fairly safe to assume that each side would teach its own population the narrative that it wants to portray itself in the good light, not the bad light. So keeping that in mind, I think that is one of the main takeaways from this conversation. And the action items I would say would be to actually learn more deeper into what the other, what like in like not just on your side but on the other side as well. And it's not like I want to bring this up just to like add on to what Amara was saying before in regards to like how Palestinians would have a stigma with the term Zionism. And in that same term is like deeply embedded into the Jewish identity. So it's like you don't have a stage one agreement when you use that term, because for Palestinians they receive it in a different way than Jews express it. So one of the things that obviously how Palestinians perceive Zionism is as the political movement to establish their demographic reversal. And I know Daniel said it was never the intention of Zionists to displace Palestinians, but I think the majority of Zionists in the beginnings were just indifferent towards
We
Palestinians
just
because they were
didn't
being
see in the 40s.
taught.
We just, yeah. I didn't mean to cut you off. I just wanted to, because I know what you're getting at. I know it's, we didn't see, honestly, even the 30s and the 40s was around that era where we underestimated how much space we needed, how much time we needed to strategically get in all the waves of immigration. Because you can't just have them all pull up at the border at the same time on the same day, isn't it? It's a strategy. And the places that we needed to house them, like I said, I had my grandma, when she came here after 48. She lived, the first place that she lived was Kiryat Gat, which was built on this place. Yeah. So it's true what you're saying, but at the same time, it's the intention.
Yeah. See, I need you to Google, if everyone can Google the Rabbi Chaim Simons, right? Like the thing is, when because the majority of the Zionists that were being sold the dream were just indifferent to the local Arab population. It allowed the more extremist voices in terms of the people that were pushing radicalization, like radical depopulation of the things. Rabbi Chaim Simons documents these efforts to transfer Palestinians from Palestine since 1895. And that's something which like I would not assume someone would teach you, you know what I mean, about, you know, the early stages of Zionism. And I believe that the minority of Zionists, the minority of Zionists at the creation of Zionism knew that the only way that they would have a stable basis to create a Jewish country is if they reverse the demographics from Jews being 8% of the minority of the population to the majority of the population. And even when the waves of Aliyah came, even after World War II, they rose from 8% to 30% in by 1946. And so the only way that you could have 30% of the population become the majority of the population, whether it was the intent or not of most Zionists at the time, was to reduce the amount of Arabs living in the population. So you can see from 1947 to 1948, the Arabs will go from approximately 1.3 million to 156,000. And like this is what Palestinians associate the term Zionism with, you know, the efforts to depopulate them and to reduce them into a demographic minority so that you could have a stable basis to establish a Jewish country and have self-determination. Zionism to Palestinians is simply Jewish self-determination at the expense of Palestinian self-determination. And so I think that's why it's a good thing that it's one of the things that we should do in all these like efforts of discussion. Everything is destigmatize the words, explaining to other Palestinians that this is not what the average Jewish person means when he identifies as a Zionist. You know, he's not identifying as a Zionist in terms of specifically referring to your demographic reversal or your depopulation. He's referring to like he or she's identity as a Jewish person and to fulfill their right of having self-determination, just as we have that same right. And as I mentioned before, in regards to connections, like I said, connections are in the eye of the beholder. Your connection is not more valid than our connection to the land, because connections are abstract in that way. And that's the thing in terms of having that respect for each other, is respecting both of our connections to that land and having them both validated by the other side. And I think that's a good stable basis to create a foundation of one respectful dialogue and a way forward for us to come closer together.
Agreed. Yeah.
I would also say people don't really care about. I'll be super quick. People don't really care about labels that much. The one good thing I can think of, I don't know whether it was Adar who said it. Probably the only good quote I could think of him saying, or maybe it was Saeed Barakat, who said something like, "Give us, you know, our rights, and we'll acknowledge you as the North Korean state. Like, we'll acknowledge you as whatever you want." I mean, we really don't. For a lot of Palestinians, they also just, you have to understand how little they are invested in this history right now. I mean, they don't care. They honestly don't care. I mean, yeah, they have no reason to care right now. So, what Zionism means for, you know, Israeli Jews, you know, why they should understand that your presence here is any different to that of you know, any colonizer, or the British or the Ottomans or the Byzantines. So, you know, you're talking about tribes that are very used to another group of people coming into the country and running the place. So for us, I mean, understanding that this is different isn't going to happen until after reconciliation. I mean, once you begin conversations once you begin a conversation where you're meeting like what Palestinians consider justice, which I really don't think is a threat or even a detriment to Israelis. I mean, it actually, you're talking about building a better country in every way, shape, or form for both people. So the two ideas aren't at odds with each other. But we're not that obsessed with terms. It's just that ultimately it's what it means today. What we associate with the term changes over time. So the average person doesn't even want to partake in that sort of debate.
I think that at the end of the day, we both have deep love and, like Jason and everyone else said, connection to this land. And I think that needs to be the basically common denominator when building our common narrative. It's focus on the love we have for this land. And I think that would open the minds of many to understanding each other's narratives. We're not fighting over this land. We both wanted to prosper. And so there is no land without the two of us. And the more we put that into our narrative, the more we talk about it, the more I, as an Israeli, will come to a Palestinian and say, oh, look, you guys were raised to hate me. Look at what I saw. And then you're like, no, this is actually what happened. And when you come to me and say, yo, Israel's doing this and Israelis think that, and I'm like, no, you know, that will create just a common narrative, common dialogue, and inshallah, B'ezrat Hashem, also a common identity. Like, you know, an ultra one of this land, people of this land.
I think. Oh, sorry.
No, okay, you can.
Yeah, no, I think we have to acknowledge that the situation is not sustainable for neither sides. It's not sustainable on the long term. Nobody's absolutely in good shape, let's say. So that's, I think, to answer Amar's question, that might be the reason where we say, yeah, we need to change, because eventually it will explode into something really nasty. So that's the big point. I think in terms of moving forward, it's also, when we talk about narratives, the word narrative itself sometimes gives me anxiety, because it's talking about lived experience versus the objective truth, and we need to be able to look at things with an objective eye, an objective mind, and accept that there are truth, there's data, there are things that are verifiable, and we need to work from there. But the key to all of this, and I said it before and I'm going to say it again, is empathy. And while, in certain situations, because of, let's say, continued carnage, it's hard to care. You get into a state of apathy, and that's true to a certain extent. I don't think empathy will ever disappear from human nature. So we need to work on that. I think that would be my final note, is empathy. Work on establishing empathy on both sides.
Sure, my turn. So I had an interesting conversation earlier this week, I think, with Abu Omar here. We were talking about, if everyone was going to live together, how each side would fear the other sort of taking over their land. Like Israelis think, if we give the right of return to Palestinians, all the Palestinians in the world will come here and like take over the whole place. And I was wondering, and I don't think that's realistic. I think we as Jews need to be confident in the fact that we're here and we're rooted and we're not going anywhere. But that, like, I wondered if Palestinians felt the same way. And he was saying, yes, they're worried that if we live together, the Israelis will just buy up the whole place and they'll bring in, more people. So both sides are sort of afraid of the other and don't realize how strong they would be if they, in this conflict altogether, and if they were to live together. They're looking themselves the weaker party. And I think that the perspective, I don't know how to say it, maybe metaphorically, you have to look at yourself like you're like a very strongly rooted tree. Like we're really not going anywhere. Like the Jews, we're here from thousands of years, and that's how I sort of see it. And you have to look at the Palestinians as like, as like a delicate garden that you actually care about and you want to preserve and keep. And regardless of what happened with the Zionist history, they didn't look at it that way. They didn't care about the Palestinians. There were some of them that wanted to live with them as equals. There was like, small minority groups or some that didn't so much care, but they didn't want to like make the Palestine flourish for the Palestinians. They thought about it for themselves. And that's the perspective I guess a lot of people have been touching on, is that you need to actually care about the other side. And I don't expect that all the Palestinians, while I'm occupying them and some of them are in the diaspora and whatever, are going to really care about, my roots and my history here. But I'd hope that if they see that if we actually care about their freedom as much as we care about our own, then they'll start to see that the truth that we do have roots here for thousands of years, and we're not going anywhere, and hope that they would see us as something that they want to see flourish here, and like something precious to them. And that's sort of what I'd like to see grow in the in the mindset of both of us.
Rafi, I think it's easy to feel that way. I mean, I was interested in learning the history because of talking to people like yourself, right? So that's part of it. So yeah, having these sorts of conversations is what makes that happen.
Anyone else for final thoughts? I believe Amiel, you still need to go. Karma, and I believe that's it, right? Yeah, Amiel and Karma.
And Danielle, I think.
Yeah. So I think I saw in the commentary, like someone said, they don't miss Star Hooper. So yeah, I know some guys here remember him. I know him, but in the end, people like Star Hooper are the one who are the problem, and to solve this problem, you need to speak with them. Like you cannot just say, let's not speak with him because he's insulting and he's. You need to go over it because you're over the insult. You want to fix this conflict. Like
Mm.
the insult don't should not get you. That's what I mean. Because when you just don't want to hear the other because he insulting you, then violence will come after. Simple as that. Because if there is no talking, there will be violence. So I myself in the past talk with Hamas member. Yes, it sound fun, but really I spoke with Hamas member. Like there is Hamas member with internet connection, the speaking in the internet, and I had the I don't know if it was chance, but probably chance that one was talking English and I could talk with him. It was from Al Jazeera commentaries that we began to talk with each other. And if I was stopping to talk because he began to insult me, I would never had the conversation I had with him. And I can tell you, it was a great conversation in the end. Like, really. So even Hamas members, they are human, and even if you don't agree with them, you need to talk with them, because in the end we need to deal with them too. So that's my thought about the things that Star Hooper saying. I personally spoke with him, and we had also a great conversation, even though we didn't agree on everything. I think it's okay to not agree to be insulted, but you need to try to go over the insult, because in the end there will be people that will begin to insult and then they will change their mind. Like at the beginning I was pretty radical and I was also insulting and aggressive, and I changed it. I changed my mind. So what you want to reach is the people who are insulting. Like it's hard, but that's who you want to reach, because here we pretty much agree and recognize each other, and we want to reach those who don't.
Beautiful.
Yeah. So,
Danielle, you gave final thoughts, correct?
Oh, you mean me? Yeah. No, I haven't gave it out.
No, I was sorry, we have
Or
Daniel
yeah.
and Danielle. So
Yeah.
Danny gave final thoughts. Daniel,
Yeah,
Albo,
me.
and Karma. Okay,
Yeah,
cool.
yeah. So I didn't give it yet. I think like also you talk about like Amir also said that you change. Like to me too, I was also like before, like a way a lot of Israelis see it is like you care first of all security. It's before anything else. You don't learn about anything else other than security. We have threats. Once you learn about, of course, the displacement, and then after you you learn about the displacement, you're like, well, if they just want to come here and ask to be free, how are we gonna get what we want? Like, as Jews have things that we want, and we will invest in it so that it comes out as an outcome. And what I thought is actually Abu Amar, he gave me a really good option, which is federation. And a lot of Jews don't even really know about the federation. And I just want to end off this whole thing by anyone who's watching this who has any ideas about like how we can go about with a one state and a two state and whatever, think about federation. Why? Because it gives actual Jewish like self-determination as a culture and as an ethnic group, and at the same time it gives that to the Palestinians. And if there's Jews who are listening to this, is like, well, I feel they don't feel safe. There are many Palestinians who agree with it, agree to this federation map that actually the Golan Heights, the Negev, and the central part of the West Coast is all Jewish, and they accept it as Jewish. So I think we need to learn that. There are people who are willing to learn our story, but we have to learn about them. Yeah.
Awesome. I think it's down to Karma now.
Yeah, Karma.
Karma.
Right. I think like a huge step forward into like finding a solution would be acknowledging the past events of both nations and just like accept it for what it is, like the acknowledgements of actual historic events. Because we Palestinians will not forget about like 72 years of occupation, as much as Jews didn't forget about 2,000 years of expulsions, for example. So like this point, like we should acknowledge this point for starters, like to initiate a ground basis for us, for both of us, to find a solution. Because like I don't expect a Palestinian who lost a family member, for example, or like who lost beloved ones from like the occupation, to come to peace or to come to terms with everything, unless like the other party acknowledges its mistakes and vice versa. And yeah, I hope we can discuss the federation more often than this debate. That's it.
Thank you all so much. 2.5 hours, it flies like it's nothing when we're having these meaningful conversations. A big thank you to the viewers and to chat. The chat today was super respectful, better than most. So I really appreciate everyone's contribution here today. And to our guests, Amiel, Amar, Jason, Daniel, Izzy, Omar, Danny, Rafi, and Karma. Brothers and sisters, it was a great pleasure. I'd love to have you back on for another session. From here, we take it to the lounge. If you enter Discord, can someone please put the link in the chat again? You could also find in the description of this video. You'll enter Discord. You will now be in the Great Debate Discord server, where you'll see multiple different channels for discussion based off different categories. You'll see somewhere on the left side, it says voice channels. This is where we have in-person, well, not in person, but voice and video conversations. So the after party takes place in the lounge. Enter Discord in the link. On the left hand, you'll see lounge. Click lounge twice. Once to connect, twice to see the other people who are in the lounge with you. And that's it. The conversation continues, and now it's for everyone else to join in and contribute. So with love from Tel Aviv, Israel, signing off. Until next time, friends.
Peace.